Hey, I'm Josh Schlossberg, host of the Green Root Podcast, the official podcast of Eco Integrity Alliance, eco-integrityalliance.org, where we're on a quest to uncover the roots of the ecological crisis. For this episode, we're speaking with Jennifer Mamola. Jen has been an integral part of the John Muir Project's Washington, D.C. office since fall 2019, serving as the dedicated policy and advocacy director. Before joining the John Muir Project, Jen spent 5 years advocating for the health, safety, and security of Peace Corps volunteers on Capitol Hill. Jennifer, welcome to the Green Root Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, you're really the perfect person to talk to about this topic, which is with the results of the most recent election in the US here, what this means for forests. So that's basically what we're going to chat about. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about what's your day to day? What's your involvement on Capitol Hill in DC? Because I know almost nothing about what goes on there.
Yeah, I mean, DC is a lovely place. Even though there's full of swamp creatures, I guess I'm kind of one of them, but not really. I get up and read the news after I have a nice healthy cup of coffee, and just kind of try and, I have some buzzwords I plug in to review and see what's happening, what's being said out there on the forest front, the climate front, things of that nature. And then depending on if Congress is in recess or not, just kind of hounding certain offices depending on like what legislation's out, what hearings are going on, just kind of it changes day to day. It just really depends on it definitely depends on if the I probably shouldn't say this, if the clowns are at the circus or not, is kind of how I put it, or if they're back at home in their districts. And so it's just kind of a lot of sifting through information. It's a lot of, I've kind of really pivoted recently in this last Congress, really trying to go the advocacy route and bringing in grassroots groups into meetings, because constituents are really what offices want to hear from. So, for instance, today I had a meeting with some Kentucky and Tennessee constituents over concerns about a white oak initiative bill. And we talked to their senators' offices and just kind of outlined the concerns and tried to get intel on like, is this moving this Congress during the lame duck? Is it something we need to worry about next Congress? And if it is next Congress, can we get some additions added before it's reintroduced in the 119th Congress? So it's never really the same, which I really actually like. It's nice to kind of, not have the same day in, day out. But when they are in town and like, we're on crunch because it's Thursday, December 5th, and the government shuts down in 2 weeks if they don't pass appropriations. There's also a lot of talk about, a permitting package or a public lands package. And with this trifecta coming up for the 119th Congress, there is it feels like the Democrats want to try and get what they can done. But my main concern next Congress is what's called reconciliation. And that's mostly a budgeting bill, but the Inflation Reduction Act is what the Democrats passed as their reconciliation bill. So normally, for anything to pass, you need 60 votes in the Senate, except when it comes to reconciliation packages that are budget-based bills. And so the Democrats did get some pretty heavy lifts in. And so, Bruce Westerman's already talking about, he's a Republican from Arkansas in the House. He's the chair of the House Natural Resources Committee. They're already talking to the parliamentarian to see what they can get away with. And the Republicans are hoping to pass 2 reconciliation bills next Congress, which is, going to be quite interesting if they can get it done. And there's such a slim majority in the House. The final California House race was just called, so it's 220 Republican members in the House versus 215 Democrats, and 3 of those Republicans have already been slated for the next administration. So it's a pretty tight margin. unfortunately in the Senate, I think it's 53 seats. Or I'd have to double check that. So there's, you know, they'd still have to peel off 7 Democrats outside of a reconciliation package for a lot of things. But unfortunately, on the forest front, I think they could probably it wouldn't it wouldn't be that hard of a lift, unfortunately. So yeah, it's I joke about going on a sabbatical for the next 2 years, but ultimately, Congress is never really forest friendly on our issues. So yeah, it's a lot of sit and wait and try and like be as proactive as possible as far as like having meetings and you know, I you may or may not have to cut this part out. I'll have to double check with Chad, but we are hopeful to get a bill that we've drafted introduced. So right now, what we're doing is we're trying to drum up um, going into this next Congress, we're trying to put together like a letters to the editor campaign on how to like for local constituents to kind of raise awareness of the bill that we're trying to get introduced to then find hopefully a champion in Congress. I'd have to look it up because I can't remember it off the top of my head. We keep kind of changing the title of it. But it's forest protection, community protection from wildfire. Everything we kind of harp on, working from the community out rather than the wild in, true community or true forest protection, no extraction kind of thing. So that was a lot. I don't know if that was helpful, but
That's excellent. No, these are the exact details that I was hoping from you because I don't have really any of these. I have a 30,000 foot view of things, but I don't know the finer points. And so that's excellent, especially, okay, we're waiting for some bill that's magically good to drop out of the sky. We're always fighting the bad bills, which I
yeah.
would like to talk to you a little bit more about too. But basically drafting our own bill in a sense and then looking for the champion. So, but pulling back, I guess, into some generalities, I think it's fair to say that overall on the environment, Democrats are better often, at least have better rhetoric, and I think do have a certain track record of on a lot of environmental issues of passing legislation that is certainly more pro-environment than the Republicans. Would you say that's generally true?
Yeah, there's definitely been more outrage like over the Fix Our Forest Act that wants to claw back environmental laws. There are some Democrats that have been thankfully very vocal and outspoken about those concerns. Unfortunately, 55 Democrats did vote for it in the House in September. I was trying to take solace in the fact that the White House said that they oppose it, so maybe they're just trying to, right before the election, take a bipartisan win, so they could go home and like campaign on that. And there is still concern before, the 119th Congress gets sworn in on January 3rd, so there's still time for the supposed public lands package or a possible permitting package to happen. I'm not a betting person. I 50-50 maybe, I don't know. It's the whiplash of Congress, right? There's just so much will they, won't they? There's so much behind the scenes conversations that go on that, most of us are not privy to, even though, we're in it every day. Which is really frustrating. And I mean, I feel like even staffers half the time they're like, I mean, we hear this, we hear that, but like we're not really sure. But to go back to the question, yeah, I mean, ultimately, would I prefer, you know, I'm trying to find a good way. I think unfortunately, for better or worse, Democrats will hopefully be more environmentally conscious and friendly with this Republican trifecta. I mean, there are a handful of blue dog Democrats, especially on the West Coast. Like George Whitesides just got elected from Southern California. He's this co-founder of Mega Fire Action, who's actually the group supposedly behind Fix Our Forests. And so, yeah, I guess I agree, but like I wish it were more so. I wish Democrats would, not kind of fall into this, all of the tools in the toolbox rhetoric, these buzzwords about resiliency this and restoration that. We really need to use one of their favorite phrases, shift the paradigm, right? We're we're constantly seeing like what they're doing on the ground just repackaged and kind of, with different verbiage to kind of seem not so destructive. And, when you go out there on the field, like it's not thinning, right? Like they're not taking the smallest diameter trees. Like, this is where I would cut to like all the pictures we have, right? Like, the stumps aren't the size of your hand, right? The stumps are three of us sitting on there and there's still room, to have a picnic kind of thing. So I like on paper, like, in interviews, yeah, they're definitely better, but I just wish their actions were better.
Yeah. And I do actually want to get a little bit more into that. But first, because you did mention it a few times, the Fix Our Forest Act, if you could just give a little more details on what that is slash was to be, whatever.
Yeah, it's a bill, there's like I haven't looked at it in a while, so I mean I can definitely kind of so I mean it would not so one of my favorite things in congressional hearings, I think it's more on the House side than on the Senate side, is, oh, all these environmental groups, they just sue the government so they can line their pockets, and like in my rented home in DC, like I mean, it's hilarious to me, right? Like I mean, if only, but not really,
Mhm.
because that's not what I'm in this job for, right? Like I'm in this job for environmental protections that benefit all of us.
Right.
And at the end of the day, most of the groups that do sue the government, who's breaking the law, right? We're suing them because they are not adhering to their own laws, which is part of why this law is actually really scary, because
Hmm.
it would roll back environmental laws, but it would also prevent groups from suing the government, which now that I kind of say it out loud and think about it, like, how could we sue the government if you're just going to claw back the environmental laws? I'm not a lawyer, so I'm sure there's definitely possibilities and whatnot, but it's just really frustrating when, you know, people in power are saying these audacious things to, like make it seem like like environmental groups are only in it for the money, And I mean, the grassroots groups are certainly not,
Right.
the groups that you and I work with, I could sit here and naming them all day. Like they are the people, most of these people, it's their passion project, right? This is like they're teachers and nurses and they have other jobs. A lot of
Mhm.
these grassroots groups are doing this on their own time and dime because they are so passionate about it. And then they bring it to the smaller green groups in hopes that they can find someone to take this to court, right? And I think I just saw somebody in one of the bigger green groups. They're like, we take 1% of what should go to court because there's just so much, you know, malfeasance or how like in the backcountry in on our public lands,
Right.
we no one can keep up with it,
Right.
and this is what they want. They don't want to let us hold the government accountable. I mean, believe I would love to be out of a job, right? I don't want to do this anymore. Like I I love my job, but it's really frustrating to have
Yeah.
it, and it's really frustrating to be called, an eco-terrorist because what I see on the landscape infuriates me, Like it's just so heartbreaking. And to kind of have this like, well, we're in this clean energy, what do they say? Like I get it. We need to stop burning things. Especially biomass, right? Like
Mhm.
biomass is the dirtiest form of energy, yet both sides of the aisle are trying to sell it as a clean form of alternative energy. And it's not. But the missing piece of the puzzle, one of the biggest missing pieces of this climate crisis puzzle is biodiversity. Like the landscape is not the same. So why are we pointing back hundreds of years ago to what it looked like or didn't look like and acting like we know better than Mother Nature, Like it's just ludicrous. And it really frustrates me. And I like now I know I've gone on like 12 different tangents.
Oh, no, this is all relevant. This is the discussion. Yeah. And I mean, I feel the same way. And yeah, it's really frustrating, but this is the work that needs to be done. And I think in many ways, strangely, for environmental issues, a lot of the environmental movement, which has done some great stuff on climate or at least awareness of climate, has sort of given up on the idea of land protection or is even hostile towards it. So it's almost like, yeah, we're the redheaded stepchild of the environmental movement, which is already considered to be fringe and radical and whatever. So yeah, it's frustrating.
I would say, like forest protection in particular, like
Sure.
everybody can get behind no plastics and and in ocean pollution and but I think the hardest part for me that I try to explain, like people just think, well, if you cut a tree down, it'll just grow back, right?
Mm.
And that's, I feel like, the narrative that, the federal agencies, state agencies, and members of Congress try and sell the public, right? But when you go out there, that's not what you see on the ground, like they're not going in with pruning shears and a rake, like I kind of like I've joked about this many times. Let's draft a bill where you can go in and do what you think they were doing a couple hundred years ago with those same exact tools. You don't get you have to go on a pack mule, you can't, no fossil fuels allowed, no like
Right.
let's just stop pretending that we know what is best for nature. But again, they're not taking these, 6-inch little saplings. Like I just saw an article today promoting the fact that the Forest Service, with permits, encourages people to go get Christmas trees off of national forests because it helps mitigate wildfires. And it's
Mm.
like, okay, but you're not taking those Christmas tree sized trees when you're doing this work that you're selling to the public, right?
That's right.
You're taking trees that are going to take at least two of us to hug, like this isn't just clearing the underbrush and the understory. And it shouldn't be about that because these are natural ecosystems that are going to flush itself out, whether it's through a wildfire or a bark beetle outbreak, or drought. But
Mm.
ultimately, at the end of the day, like we're only making it worse, and until we focus on the human communities, it's just, I mean, it's not even, it's just so frustrating. Especially like nobody, what about the human caused ignitions, which is more than, almost 90% of fires caused.
Right.
80% of fires this year were in grass fire or grasslands, Like we have to learn to live with fire. We cannot be so fire phobic because ultimately we live on a fire planet and you can pave the planet over tomorrow and you know what you're still going to have to deal with? Fire. So it's just, you know, and the media really isn't any help. Like it's just it's such a tall order and, it does get really depressing, but I mean, thankfully the groups that we work with are really what keep me going, like the just all over the country too, right? Because this isn't just a West Coast issue. Being out here in DC, I'm from California. But like, in March, it was a really windy day and there were like fires around DC. There was like 12 of them. Like recently up north, I think it was like a week or two ago, very windy, also fires. I think one of them was at least arson, but like but then you see all these articles start popping up like, oh, got to get rid of the vegetation. If we just get rid of the vegetation, if we get a control on the vegetation, boy golly, will we get a control on fire. And it's just like when I say it out loud, like I'm like, how does that how I just don't get it.
Yeah, no, but that's really it. I think it's a lot of this exploiting of a natural fear of fire, which I actually think comes from a fear of forests. I have a letter I haven't
Mm.
submitted
Yeah.
anywhere yet that basically does talk about how, the original fear of forests was kind of like evil spirits, right? And then it was, wildlife in there. And then it was like
Mhm.
Native
So true.
Americans living in the forest, things like that. And then there's
Yeah.
bandits out there, Robin Hood. Like there was always this thing, and it was an exploitation of that
Hmm.
a lot of times for control, government interest, corporate interest. And now the boogeyman is fire.
Yeah.
So that's what they're doing. And yeah, like we said before, uh, in this case, this may be unpleasant for some listeners, or maybe at this point our listeners understand this. The Democrats have been equally as bad, and
Listen.
maybe there's even more of them right now. All I know is that the biggest cheerleaders in Congress right now for quote wildfire reduction, fuel reduction logging, whatever you call it, what I call it, wildfire pretense logging, it's Colorado's congressional delegation. That's Senator Hickenlooper Bennett, and we got Representative Neguse, who is my representative here. And in Oregon, it's Senator Wyden and Merkley and some other Val Hoyle, a representative. These are all Democrats. This is not, and just to make sure, this is not support of Republicans. This is not demonizing Democrats. This is just stating the reality. If the concern is forest protection, here are the people across the aisle. I mean, we want bipartisanship, but not for bad things. But
Yeah.
this is what we're dealing with.
Yeah, and I mean there is a two good bills off the top of my head. I might fudge up the numbers. I think Kylie's bill, HR 6861, the Safe Home Act, is a tax credit for home hardening and defensible space. Great.
Yeah.
But then and not everybody, like, when I do like, I don't tax credits, like, I don't, that's beyond me, right? So not everybody can utilize that. So Rep Huffman, and so I'm sorry, I should probably back up. Rep Kylie is a Republican from the Tahoe area on the California side. And Rep Huffman and Rep or Olbernolte, both California reps, one Republican, one Democrat, have introduced the Community Protection and Wildfire Resilience Act, I think is its name, HR 9780. And it's money for home hardening, defensible space, better evacuation routes, things of that nature. I think one component that's kind of missing from the conversation are smoke centers. I think smoke centers
Mhm.
would be a really good idea for, I mean, I all areas to implement, like I think was it last summer? Yeah, it was last summer when the Canadian wildfires, like all the East Coast was blanketed. We were out in front of a protest in front of the White House, and people were commenting on it. And I was like, yeah, but like, I mean, I won't get into Canadian politics, but anyways, um, yeah, it's really unfortunate. It would be really nice for Congress to truly shift the paradigm and work from the community out and not the wild in. And I think ultimately, you know, it we have to take responsibility, right, for where we are living. And it's on every level, right? A climate level, like, my friend really likes to call me an eco-socialist. I'm always trying to ride my bike and take public transportation. Um, you know, what have you. Like, I'm guilty of taking a plane. I just came back from Texas seeing my mother for her 60th birthday, like, but I really do try to reduce reuse, right? Like all of the clothes I'm wearing are secondhand. I really try to practice what I preach. And I think, you know, that is a missing component from, the environmental um well, I shouldn't even say that because I don't really know. I don't know, how the members, live their lives. But it would be nice if they would follow through for once, right? Like Joe Goose was at this Wilderness Awards ceremony in September, and I asked him, I said, it would be really nice if you would come on a post-fire habitat visit with us so we can show you what we see on the ground rather than a Forest Service-led expedition, to what they want you to see. It's not that I won't meet in the middle. But like we have to start on the fringe left on this. Otherwise, we're never gonna get anything, right? Like even the mature and old growth stuff, right? Like I was excluded from the bigger green group because they knew, a tree matures anywhere between 25 and 35 years, right? That's when they can actually reproduce. That is the little, like, that is when trees are mature. But they started at 80 years. And it's like, you guys, you don't negotiate, like, you don't just hand them,
Right.
like, you've got to start way over there to meet even halfway. I mean, you probably weren't even going to get that, right? So it's just, I wish people weren't so concerned with their contact list, and their ins to offices and things like that, and really just got back to, advocating for what's right, like
Mhm.
for what is ultimately like the truth. When I go into these places and I see what is being done in the name of fire, it makes me really sad, but it also really makes me like it's just so infuriating. And
Right.
we know people whose lands butt up against Forest Service, who have had such trouble, like they're just bullies and nobody will listen to the independent science. Like nobody wants to have the conversation. Well, like, where are all these Forest Service funded scientists, like, or I guess I gave the game away. Like they're all Forest Service funded. So like when they're only using their own science, like that's a little icky, right? Like
Mhm.
why aren't we forcing these people to have conversations? And I don't mean at a congressional hearing, because that's just the circus show, Like it's usually 2 weeks before a hearing starts. You get the invitation, but then if somebody in power hears about it and they don't like you, then you're all of a sudden uninvited. But even then, it's kind of pointless to go to a hearing because, members get 5 minutes to ask questions, and then half the time they're hostile and they won't let you answer. I mean, you can go back and look. It was during COVID, so it was all online. But, Dr. Bev Law of Oregon State was invited to a hearing, and they just kept cutting her off. They wouldn't let her finish, Like they don't have any desire to listen to the independent science or even, science that just says the opposite, like I mean it's just so infuriating, So it's just about the soundbite and how you can like, go fundraise off of it and tell people what they want to hear rather than explaining to people like, I understand Smokey Bear has scared you to think that fire is not natural, but it is okay for
Mhm.
places to burn. It is natural. It is okay to leave it be after the fact and let nature regenerate naturally, And they're doing just such unnatural things in all forest types, Like we've got groups out here in the east that are really combating like overprescribed fire. Like the forests out here do not burn that often, but they are doing prescribed fire every 3 to 5 years. It's just insane. It's like the industrial military complex. Spend your budget so I can get it the next year, It's all about the money, and that's I think the hardest part. Like when I was lobbying for Peace Corps stuff, right? Like you would hear of all this stuff about the military, like the Peace Corps budget. Sorry to have the Peace Corps detour. $435 million dollars a year is their annual budget for 7,000 volunteers. Granted, this is a few years ago. It's been a while since I've been in that sector, but but the DoD budget, billions, right? Billions of dollars. I had a friend who was medevaced, or her group was evacuated to an air base in Turkmenistan where they had surf and turf every day that week because they had to spend their budget. My friend's mom was in the Air Force and she was stationed in South Carolina. And she's like, we have warehouses full of office chairs and printers because we had to spend our budget. And that's what we spent it on so we could get it the next year. Where like I would love to see, oh, speaking of money, there's a FEMA budget or a FEMA report from 2018 that explicitly states for every dollar you invest in infrastructure hardening for wildfire, you save $3 to $4 down the road. So let's have them Congress loves a report. Put together a report, your payback on extractive timber harvesting and all of this management you're doing in the name of wildfire, and then compare it to if you actually invested it in home hardening and defensible space, how much money you would save down the road. You know, like Lahaina, grass fire. Marshall Fire, grass fire. That one in the Texas Panhandle this year, grass fire. You know, like what are we doing? I understand the need to control things. I was on the 101 during the Thomas Fire. It was terrifying, and that's why when I got this job and, I always knew fire was natural, but I didn't know the extent of what our government was like really doing, right? It's just so frustrating. And I understand that it's not that much money compared to so many other things like DOD, but ultimately, it's our climate capital, I guess. It's our bio like this is our social security for down the road, and they are, burning through it. I almost feel like they're doing it intentionally too, right? Because like the pictures we've all taken with the tiny little spindly trees in the background and the big stumps, it's like they're leaving that behind intentionally. So when and if something does go burn through there, they can be like, oh, we'll see. Like I mean, now I know I'm getting a little conspiratorial, but you kind of do when you're in this line of work because you're just like, I mean, why? Like, why are they doing this? I know some, I don't know. I'll stop there because I might
Well,
come.
no, I mean, obviously does benefit them when more of the fires burn, that they can then say, well, that's why we had to log. And then if they log and then the fires burn through that, they say, yeah, well, that's because we weren't allowed to log the way we wanted to. So yeah, no matter what happens, they're claiming that theirs is the solution, which is always cutting trees, which they're even denying the term logging right now. They're
Oh yeah.
actually saying we can't even use the words that are in the dictionary. But yeah, I mean, I would just add to all that, which yeah, I agree with, is that it's not just okay for the forest to burn, it's optimal. A lot of these forests
Yeah.
need it. So this isn't just, well, it's a necessary evil. It's like it's a necessary
Yeah.
good. And let's, like you said, deal with the communities. How do we deal with the communities? Well, guess what? There is consensus on the thing that protects the communities the most, which is home hardening and defensible space pruning, less than 100 feet,
Yeah.
50 to 15 to 60 feet, whatever numbers you want to use, right around the home. We already know, but then why is 99% or thereabout of the funding going towards tree cutting in the forest? Well, we know because it keeps the agencies going. And, so yeah, well, so I guess we could take this to sort of like wind things down is, so you and I and several other community members have spoken to some of our elected officials here in Colorado. So we've done virtual calls. We've had Dr. Chad Hansen, who is the forest ecologist, with John Muir Project. He's put out countless peer-reviewed studies, is a national expert on wildfire ecology, and other people who are doing home hardening, people like you mentioned before, somebody who actually lives adjacent to these forests that they're supposedly logging on her behalf, but she's saying, no, you're making my house more likely to burn, et cetera, et cetera. We spoke to them, we provide them information. We usually speak to some staffers, so we don't know if it gets to the politician, but I will reveal this detail because I do think it's pertinent, even if it makes me look bad. So I had spoken to Representative Joe Neguse. So we had spoken to his office. I ran into him in person at a farmer's market in Boulder, Colorado. It doesn't get any more Colorado than that. I went up to him. I said, "Hey, maybe you want to take a look at this brochure." He actually knew who I was. He literally quoted something from a recent op-ed. So I knew he knew the points we were making.
Yeah.
And so he wasn't just, blowing smoke, so to speak. And so he suggested to me, you know what? We need to have a person, in face meeting, set it up with my staffers. Long story short, 8 months later, that meeting never happened. I don't actually think Representative Neguse would have cared one way or another to be like, let's just not meet. I think it was the staffers who were trying to just downplay it, push it off, or whatever. And so basically, right now, we're in discussion with Representative Neguse because we just found a grant that literally came from his office to log forests in a county out here in Jefferson County, Colorado, which Green Root podcast listeners might know because it's been, to me, the poster child of how bad a lot of this wildfire pretense logging can be. It's clear cutting, logging old growth trees up to, I counted up to 211 years old, which out here in Colorado is kind of a big deal. So his grant literally went towards doing this sort of logging. And I traced it to these parks. And so we're trying to talk to him right now. So, long story short, obviously the grassroots are going to have limited influence, etc. But, we'll even have to deal with what may or may not be dishonesty or just at least deprioritizing of voices where you have to keep following up to even get through. But so my question for you would be, what is it that politicians, elected officials actually listen to?
I mean, I mean, um, donors for sure, and I mean, that's really hard. Like when I first started this job, I was like trying to look up and like, Nagoose specifically, like I haven't looked it up in a couple years, but it was a lot of realtors.
Mhm.
He's getting a lot of money from like realtors and things. I mean, they do say op-eds, right? But like even some offices when I try and bring constituents, they're like, crickets, because they don't want to deal with it. They don't want to listen to you. They don't want to, hear the other side because and they're, I mean, essentially they're all in cahoots together, right? Like I mean, when they're just so buddy buddy with like the Forest Service, like when Randy Moore comes for hearings, I mean, he has gotten grilled, and I did appreciate Randy in a Senate Energy and Natural Resources hearing, because they were, acreage, board feet, like that's all, like why more? And he was like, maybe we should think about how the acres are treated rather than how many of the acres are treated, and I was like, A plus, Randy. Like, we don't agree with how they should be treated, but I appreciate you pushing back on the fact that you should just be doing more, like, and so, I mean, it's anybody's guess. Like, unfortunately, right, there's 435 members of Congress, um, or representatives and 100 senators, and ultimately, and then it's like the other frustrating part is, especially, I always go after the new members of Congress when Congress starts. Like, okay, like you're a newbie, like let's talk before the Democratic establishment or the Republicans a little bit, but like, both sides, before they like, taint you, I guess, and it misinform you and just give you the DNC or the RNC talking points, right?
Right,
And
right.
I think that's always, Congress, there's a new Congress every 2 years. So every two
Right.
years they get a restart. And I'm like, okay, guys, like before you get the DNC talking points, like let me inform you of the independent science out there that is proven to keep communities safe, right? Well, and I guess Dr. Jack Cohen, who's retired Forest Service, it's not really independent because it was Forest Service, right? But you don't really hear about it being talked about,
No.
Like, I mean, my jaw dropped when somebody in a House Natural Resources Committee, Rep. Mullen of the South Bay, mentioned defensible space. I was like, yes,
Mhm.
please. Can we have more conversations like this? I understand, like, and I don't think most people know, right? The Forest Service is under the US Department of Agriculture. So they don't see these spaces as things to protect. It is a commodity. It is a crop for them. But the frustrating part is overnight, and this is a statistic on their own website, over 90% of our wood products come from private timberlands.
Right.
So we do not need to even touch public lands, right? And this gets back to my eco-socialism. We need to reduce and reuse. We should not be, cutting down new things. I know there's a housing crisis, but there's got to be some way to reuse and repurpose the things that we already have, you know? shipping containers, what have you. Again, not really know my department, more pie in the sky thinking, but like, we this is what we have to be doing, right? We have to stop extracting new things. We have to stop burning things. And we really have to take a look. And I mean, I know as I say this, seeing all the tchotchkes behind me, it's just like we have to take responsibility for our own consumption. And I understand it's usually, it's mostly the billionaires and the private jet users and those kind of people. But, and this is like totally off base of your initial question, but,
Mhm.
you know, believe me, if I knew why, who and what Congress listened to, like, I would have done that a long time ago. But unfortunately, it's, just not giving up and just constantly I don't want to even say harassing because it's our job as their constituents to hold them accountable, right? People think, oh, it's my civic duty to vote and then I'm done. No, your civic duty does not end at the ballot box. You need to, you know, find two causes that you're most passionate about and figure out what your member of Congress and your senators are doing on those issues. And you need to hold them accountable, writing letters to the editor, op-eds if anything comes out about them, getting your neighbors and your friends and your family, doesn't matter if they're in the same district or state or not, and asking, like, oh, yeah, what is so and so doing with his, valuable time in Washington, D.C., with our tax dollars paying his salary? Like, really just like we need more of that. I mean, I love sitting in congressional offices because the interns will pick up the phone, and you can always like tell that it's like the same guy calling about the same thing,
Mhm.
just time and, like just laying it into him. And like, we just need more people to do that, right? Like, we
Mhm.
really need more people to call in and be like, what are you doing about this?
Mhm.
Like, you're supporting, the fix, you voted for the Fix Our Forest Act. Why? Why did you do that? Why aren't you going for Huffman's bill or Kylie's bill? Like, we need protections. We need this, we need that, and I know it could go the other way for the people that believe the opposite of what we believe, but you know, it's it's just really frustrating when you think you're getting somewhere with an office and then, or maybe like the staffer leaves, so then you're like restarting all over again. And that's why I really, I lean on the groups that are on the ground, right? I am very fortunate in my job. I get to travel and go visit these places and these people that are doing the on the ground, like the hard work, like, you and Deanna, like across the country. And it's just um it's really unfortunate that their work and voices aren't taken more seriously on Capitol Hill, and that's, believe me, there are times where I'm like, I'll just go pour coffee or beer or something because like I can't like it's we're broken records, right? You're just constantly repeating the same information and hoping it'll click and someone will have the decency to do the right thing rather than just falling in line with the DNC or the RNC and not questioning, like, wait, why are we doing business as usual and calling it a paradigm shift? Like, what, like, we're not actually doing anything differently. And why do we need more board feet? Why does it's always money, 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 even though more money is in, recreational activities than the extractive industries, like, yeah. So, I mean, I think I would have put us all out of a job if I knew what what gets, members of Congress to listen. It's, groups like Eco Integrity Alliance and others that really keep me going because, it is lonely out here, don't get me wrong, but it's the people on the grounds that have seen firsthand what the Forest Service is selling and are outraged and are trying to do something about it. And I am really honored to be that catalyst to bring them to Capitol Hill so they can share their stories and their experiences in hopes that their member of Congress will do something about it rather than just, oh, sure, like we'll see what we can do, and then it just, and I get like, I don't want to be a staffer. Their portfolio sounds like a nightmare, because it's not like they're just in one little bucket, and I mean, or the House of Representatives, this Congress alone had over 10,000 bills, right? Obviously, not all of them are forest or fire related, but it is a tough job. But I just wish that they had, trying to find a polite way, just more independent thinking, right? They
Mhm.
weren't, I feel like if rather than just falling in line, and maybe that's why we need more than two parties, we could actually see that paradigm shift. We could see communities taking responsibility. Like an example, two Congresses ago, like, I was pretty new in this position. They were trying to pass, it was before it was the Inflation Reduction Act, it was the Build Back Better nonsense. That's the reconciliation bill the Democrats were trying to push. And one of the provisions was this 21st Century Conservation Corps. So just kind of a revamped Civilian Climate Corps. No, 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 that's the current name. Whatever it was in the 20s, the Triple C, yeah.
Right.
So, but they were all bad provisions. It was a Neguse and Wyden bill that they were trying to stuff in to build back better. And we redline the whole bill, and we, put suggestions as to, like, it's not that we're against this notion of a 21st century conservation corps. We're against the notion that you need to be doing this backcountry management in order to save people from fire. So the offices wouldn't talk to us, and they were having this reveal party or whatever, or press conference about it. And two of the big green groups that were supporting it wouldn't talk to us either. I was trying to talk to everybody involved. No, 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 no. We'll just pass it and we'll deal with it afterwards. I,
Mhm.
do you think I'm an idiot? Like, that's not how this works, you know? You need to talk to me now and fix it now, you know? And yeah, so I showed up at this public event and was called a terrorist for merely having the audacity to show up at a public event for people that flat out refuse to have a conversation with me, And at the end of the day, like, I mean, I'll never not tell that story. It's a little frustrating. I do kind of joke about it. I mean, I know I shouldn't. Terrorism is bad. But, it's just the audacity, you know?
Mhm.
It's not even just my job. It's something I truly believe in. And the fact that you won't hear me out and you can put people to work in and around their communities rather than in the backcountry, through home hardening defensible space, replacing culverts, decommissioning roads, fully outlined. I understand it's never any fun when somebody's like, like one office doesn't like to talk to me because they're like, well, you always just tell us we're wrong. So like, why would we have a conversation with you? And it's like, well, because my job is to tell you that you are wrong because
Mhm.
you are, you
Mhm.
know? And so I always try to lead with a positive,
Mhm.
always try and, thanks so much. Your boss did X, Y, and Z, but let me tell you why you need to do one, two, and three also, And that's what we always try and do with these pieces of legislation, right? It's not like we're just sitting here badgering people. No, you're wrong. You're wrong. You're doing it wrong. You're wrong, but let me show you how to do it right, And I think the 21st Century Conservation Corps specifically could have been a really good catalyst for home hardening and defensible space, for keeping people in and around their communities. Because let's be real, right? This is going to have to happen every single year, right? Your elderly neighbor is going to need you to help clean out their gutters and to do the 5 feet around the home is the most important part. I mean, I was just down at my friend's in Richmond, and she's like, I'm like unstable on my feet. Like, can somebody clean my gutters? And I did it
Mhm.
for her.
Right.
Like, we need these community building tactics to keep us safe from the inevitable wildfire season. Because ultimately, it's not a wall of flames that comes to your town. It is flying embers.
Right.
It is flying embers because these are wind-driven events. And I think that's the other frustrating thing is the verbiage that they use. Fuels, fuels, fuels. Wind is the fuel. Okay? Full stop. Because again, I know I've already said it. You can pave the planet over tomorrow, but your house can still burn down. Okay? You can have no vegetation, but the flying embers are going to come unless you have ember-proof fence. Like the building materials are really important. Just like we need to start taking responsibility for ourselves rather than blaming a natural phenomenon and process, you know? And I think it's down the pike, right? It's members of Congress acknowledging that. It's the media acknowledging that, And I am all for like subsidizing and helping people do that, right? I am all for because it's a domino effect, Like I try to explain to non-Western members, like if you're preparing for a hurricane or tornado, when you're doing that preparation work, if your neighbor's not getting prepared, that's not more or less really going to affect your home as long as I mean, give or take certain instances. But with wildfire, if your home is defended and hardened, but there's a roof that catches on fire because of flying embers, your probability just kind of diminished a little bit. So it's a communal effort, and I mean, even one member put out this like house resolutions just drive or resolutions in general, because it's just kind of like a talking point, right? There was a resolution or a wildfire week, like, oh, we're acknowledging that like May, whatever, is going to be the beginning of wildfire week. Not real. It was all backcountry demon is like, it had no real community centric working from the home out approach, and I'm like, again, redline the bill. Nope, we're good. Not interested. And it's like, okay, I mean, I'm gonna keep trying, but hopefully one day before it's too late, before, all of our public lands are logged to oblivion and, desertification takes over or what, they're always, oh, shrub cover this, and it's like, again, who are you to say that you know better than Mother Nature? Like I know I'm rambling now and probably not making a whole ton of sense, but it's just
No,
like
no, I agree. I agree 100%. These are natural processes that have been self-sustaining and self-perpetuating for
millions,
millions of years
millions,
before humans were around.
long
Yeah,
before human feet walked this, like come on, guys,
right.
like we are a blip, and I guess that's the one twisted solace that gives me comfort in my job is, you know, if and when we really just can't get it together and we wipe ourselves out, nature will rebound. There will
Sure.
be some sort of, it'll yeah, nature will rebound because nature knows best. And it might be a little bit of a freaky hybrid for a little bit, but it'll do just fine without us. And until we can embrace um just our that we don't know better than Mother Nature. I don't know,
Right.
like it's yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm fully on board with that. And yeah, well, to just kind of encapsulate and tell me if you agree with this, maybe as a final point here. So, in regards to the whole elected officials issue, and regards to this issue particularly of wildfire and forest, which I think is just the essence of the ecological argument. Like I think it's almost symbolic of just demonization of nature, finding humans place, all that. But so a lot of the media not been very helpful. In fact, almost just kind of been running PR for agencies
Yeah.
and industry. A lot of the
Mhm.
mainstream environmental movement, not saying all, but a lot of it has been not good on this. In fact, bad. There's a lot of just average citizens who are kind of in a panic over wildfire hysteria, which ironically is making it more dangerous for them by doing more logging, but whatever. So that's not been super helpful. But is the ultimate point that strong, unflinching grassroots advocacy, which means, with real human beings on the ground, whatever, using a carrot and stick approach, like you suggested,
Yeah.
saying, hey, you all elected officials are doing this, not very good. All right, this is something we can work with this. So do you just feel like maybe until it's more uncomfortable for them to do the wrong thing than doing the right thing? Like right now, for them to do the wrong thing, that's easier for them because they're like, yeah, well, I got industry on my side. Everyone, media's kissing our butt. Most of the environmental groups aren't fighting us. So why would we do it? I almost think in my mind, I'm like, yeah, why wouldn't Rep. Nagus do anything? He has no real pressure otherwise. He may
He
know
got
that
a
the right,
wilderness award, you know? And
right,
it's like,
right.
I I'm sorry, but like, no.
So it's almost like not the politician's fault for them to continue down this path. I mean, we'd like to think that they would have the integrity of doing what they know is the right thing based on science and common sense and public opinion, but they're not. So perhaps it is upon us to really, close our ranks amongst grassroots advocates so we actually make it so there's a real reason for these elected officials to be like, man, all right, well, I'm getting a lot of heat from these folks, these average folks. These average people are kind of all on the same page with the same thing. I guess I'm going to have to back off on some of this stuff. Do you think that's a fair thing to
Yeah,
say?
I I mean, I don't know if you should include this, but I like it gets really frustrating because it does feel like a lot of the big green groups are an extension of the DNC and they just fall in line, right? They don't want to rock the boat. They have the relationships that they have built and they're not willing to speak truth to power rather than losing that access, you know? And I mean, I don't have very many allies in town, which I'm fine with because
Mhm.
again, swamp creatures, right? Like,
Yes.
um, but ultimately, and this might be controversial, like stop donating to big green groups. Go find your local, grassroots group, Blue Mountain Biodiversity Project in Oregon, fantastic. Tennessee Heartwood, phenomenal. Eco Integrity Alliance, A plus. Like the list goes on. The people that are actually on the ground doing the work and trying to hold our government accountable, that is who we should be supporting. These are the people that make very little money. They're not making six figures plus. I mean, Tracy Stone Manning of Bureau of Land Management is going, I don't think it's back to the Wilderness Society, but well, she's going to the Wilderness Society. She's going back to a big green. I think before that she was at the National Wildlife Federation. The guy that's leaving, that she's taking the position, he's making like $350,000 a year. He's a
Wow.
mouthpiece, right? Like, I mean, what are you doing? This is insane. Like TNC, when I explained, we had the big.
The Nature
Thank you.
Conservancy for
Yeah, the
folks.
Nature Conservancy. We had that big, expose, and my friend was like, "Wait, I donate to them. I have to stop donating to them." Yeah, stop. The Nature Conservancy is a billion-dollar organization. That is not a nonprofit. When you are worth $1 billion, are you kidding me? And they're in conjunction with the agencies. All of the federal funding, all of these grants and money, part of it goes to TNC because they're doing the ground on the work that they're being told to do and refuse to speak out against, even though I blatantly wrong, like it is just ludicrous. So it is a huge monster that needs to be dismantled from way too many angles. But again, it gives me solace the fact that I have phenomenal partners on the ground, day in and day out, wake up and do this work and, are speaking truth to power because like what is happening on the ground is not what they're, like showing and promoting, and this notion like, in Tahoe, it's been all this like, well, there was only 25 to 30 trees an acre. What are you talking about? Why aren't we talking about the fact that, okay, but we weren't developed, Tahoe wasn't developed like it is now. Like what stop with the pointing back to the past and what is and what has been and acknowledge we're here right now and we need to give some agency to nature. It is the notion of managing nature, like that's just so prefer. I don't know. Again, I know things are scary, like we were talking about earlier. The forest is a scary place, especially at dark. You look out your window right now, I'm sure most people wouldn't want to go outside. But, we still have to respect it. And until we respect Mother Nature, we are in for a world of hurt. Like the weather is so wild and like all over the place. And I mean, I don't know. It's just, just go on and on with my nonsense.
No, this is great. And yeah, actually, I'm about to go for my evening walk in the dark, which I literally do every night,
Nice.
which is what I like to do. But
Yeah.
yeah, and I would just add to what you said for supporting grassroots groups, supporting John Muir Project, which is really, frankly, leading the charge on this. And so, yeah, thanks, Jen, so much for really, teaching us how the sausage is made. Like I'm not, like I said, super aware of the details. So this, I think, was really helpful, I'm sure, for our listeners and definitely for me too. So that's that's been excellent to have you on. And yeah, thank you so much for all your work.
Yeah, likewise. I always appreciate working with you, and all the people you connect us with. It's really helpful. So yeah, thanks for all your good work, and hopefully we'll go frolic in a forest sometime soon.
Absolutely. We'll keep it up.